Hello viewers! Every engine in the world needs three basic things: enough fresh, clean air, a sufficient amount of fuel to go with it, and once this mixture is compressed inside the cylinder, a spark to ignite it, which is done by this, a spark plug. Now, as you may imagine, if this little thing doesn't do its job properly, you'll have all sorts of engine issues. But what exactly and what to do if that's the case? Well, let's find out. If the spark plugs are dirty or worn, you'll most likely experience a drop in the engine's performance, often accompanied by hard starting, rough idle, or even misfires. This would also probably affect the gas mileage and might even trigger a check engine light on the dashboard. But let me explain all this in a bit more detail. One of the first things you might notice when the spark plugs aren't doing their job best is the check engine light on the dashboard, which may be on all the time or even worse, flashing as you drive along. The car's onboard computer, the ECM, which monitors all the vital engine running parameters, is more than capable of spotting bad spark plugs. For instance, if the combustion isn't optimal, it'll see that based on the readings from the oxygen sensor. Or if there isn't a strong enough spark to ignite the mixture, which will cause a misfire, it will detect this and trigger a flashing check engine light. If that happens, you should stop driving immediately to avoid causing further damage. Still, keep in mind that the check engine light comes on for a multitude of problems, so you can't assume that the spark plugs are bad simply based on this warning light. Instead, you need to check the diagnostic trouble codes with your scanner and reference them in our online code library to see what's going on. Another thing you might notice is rough idle, with the engine struggling and vibrating when the throttle is off. You may also see that the revs are jumping up and down between say 600 and 1000 RPM while idling. This might mean the spark plugs are worn or dirty, but it can also be caused by many other things such as say issues with the throttle body. As said, bad spark plugs might cause an engine misfire, which in essence is when the combustion fails to happen. What you'll probably notice is that the engine is sputtering, vibrating and struggles to accelerate when you press the throttle, especially at low revs. Misfires are very damaging to the engine and the catalytic converter, so if you notice this or a flashing check engine light, take appropriate action immediately. When you turn the key in the ignition, this is a critical moment for the engine when everything needs to be just right for it to start. As you may imagine, if the spark plugs are bad, this starting won't go as smoothly as it should. Instead, the engine will crank longer and you might even have to press the throttle slightly to get it going. And even once it fires up, the car might be running rough and uneven for a minute or so. With the spark plugs not being at their best and the engine not running ideally as a consequence, you might notice a drop in the car's overall performance. More specifically, it may hesitate when you put your foot down and the acceleration won't be as sharp and vivid as it used to be. But again, this can be caused by a lot of things: bad sensors, defective fuel injectors, or something else, and for that reason, a complete diagnosis is needed before assuming the spark plugs are to blame. One thing that almost always comes in pair with engine issues is a drop in fuel economy. The fact is, for your car to achieve its EPA estimated fuel economy, the engine has to be running at optimal levels. And of course, that ain't going to be the case if the spark plugs are bad. Lastly, if the combustion process isn't optimal due to bad spark plugs, the fuel that's injected into the engine won't get burned off entirely. Instead, some of it will get out together with the exhaust gases through the tailpipe, causing a strange gas smell. The spark plug is a rather simple component. It works in pair with the ignition coil that sits on top of it and generates high voltage current. Once the ECM sends a signal to the coil, it transmits this electricity through the plug, forming a strong spark at this end here, which then ignites the air-fuel mixture. The nature of the spark plug's job also dictates its location, as its end has to be inside the cylinder. That's why you'll always find the plugs somewhere at the top of the cylinder head, with the ignition coil above them. One thing you need to keep in mind is that spark plugs are a wear and tear item and that they need to be replaced in specific intervals. The actual mileage at which this should be done differs depending on the make and model, but in general it ranges from 30 to 50,000 miles. Replacing the spark plugs is in most cases a fairly simple job that you can accomplish on your own with some basic tools. So let me show you how is this done. For a start, get a set of new spark plugs for your car. You can buy them at a local parts store or order them online, but just make sure they are the right ones for your vehicle's make and model. Next, gather all necessary tools and equipment. What you'll need is a ratchet, an extension, and a suitable socket for the spark plug. Also, some other basic tools, such as screwdrivers, might be needed to remove, for instance, an engine cover or something similar. And to get the job done properly, by the book, you should have a torque wrench. Now make sure the ignition is off, pop the hood and locate the spark plugs. Basically, what you're looking for is either plug cables or, like here, ignition coils. Undo its wiring connector carefully, and if there is a bolt securing it in its place, remove that as well. With that done, pull out the ignition coil. It may take some wiggling here because the coil's rubber boot usually grasps firmly on the spark plug. Be patient while doing so to avoid damaging the coil, whose plastic housing might be brittle. Once the coil is out of the way, you can now see the spark plug deep inside its hole within the cylinder head. If there is any oil or debris around it, make sure to blow it out with compressed air before removing the spark plug, as you don't want this gunk getting into the cylinder. Then take the ratchet with the socket on it, like so, and undo the spark plug by turning it anti-clockwise. You'll need to apply some force while doing this because the plugs are tightened firmly in their seats, or at least they should be. Having fully loosened the spark plug, you can now pull it out. This, however, can be tricky, as it will tend to slip out of the socket and back into its hole. You can overcome this problem by sticking the ignition coil onto the plug, whose rubber boot will provide sufficient grip for the extraction. Or alternatively, you can use an appropriately sized rubber hose for this purpose. The next step is to install the new spark plug, and this is where you must be careful not to cross-thread it. I'd recommend again using the rubber hose or coil itself to thread the plug in its place. Now once you partially screwed in the plug, take a socket and a ratchet, or even better, a torque wrench, and tighten it to a specified torque. In most cases you'll find the exact value written on the spark plug's box. Lastly, reinstall the ignition coil and make sure it's fitted firmly on the plug. Hook up the wiring connector and screw on the retaining bolt if the coil has it. So that's one plug done, and you obviously need to repeat this procedure for the remaining ones until all of them are replaced. Just work patiently and methodically, don't rush anything, and pay extra attention not to cross-thread the plug while screwing it in. You'll see, it's not big of a job. With the job done, what you're left with is a set of old, used spark plugs. But don't throw them in the trash just yet, as they can tell a lot about the engine's condition. In fact, these are sort of health indicators that can reveal any underlying car issues you might not be aware of. For instance, this is how a good, healthy used spark plug should look like. Sure, there is some carbon buildup on its tip, but nothing dramatic or alarming. As opposed, let me show you several photos, which I borrowed from the internet, of spark plugs that aren't in such good shape. Let's start with this one, where you can see a thick layer of carbon caused by rich mixture, meaning the engine is getting too much fuel or not enough air. Then we have this one, covered with a white-gray clay-like substance, which forms when the oil gets inside the cylinders and burns during the combustion. Similarly, crystallized formations like this one usually indicate a coolant leak caused by a cracked head gasket or the cylinder head itself. Lastly, among other possible situations, I'd point out this one, where the spark plug's tip looks burnt out or all mangled up. This is caused by extreme temperatures, which can happen either as a result of prolonged overheating or pre-ignition, both of which are very damaging to the engine. So if you see that your old spark plugs look anything like in these photos, it's time to take a closer look at the engine and figure out what's causing the problem before it gets even worse. Now, as for the prices, the spark plugs are usually 5 to 10 bucks a piece, so multiply this by the number of cylinders your engine has, 4, 6 or 8. And if you choose to have this done by a mechanic, don't forget to factor in the labor costs. If access to the spark plugs is easy, this is a quick job that shouldn't cost more than 100 bucks. But if things like the intake manifold have to be removed when replacing the plugs, it could very easily double the time needed to do the job, resulting in higher labor costs. So viewers, that would be all about the spark plugs. What happens when they are bad and how to replace them. I hope this video was helpful, and if so, don't forget to hit that like button and share it with your friends. Bye!